Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from RAU'S IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of RAU'S IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified. The what, why and how of the newspaper analysis from the Civil Service Examinations perspective. So today we are going to discuss the Hindu Delhi edition dated 24 September 2022. The important topics which are to be discussed have been displayed on the screen and the time stamping of the same has been provided in the description box below.
Hello students, there is an announcement for you regarding the optional classes which we at RAU'S IAS are starting at Bengaluru and New Delhi Center. The optional paper of Public Administration will be taken up by Anubhav Sharma sir at the Bengaluru campus on 26 September from 3:30 pm. For the history optional subject, orientation class at the Bengaluru campus will be taken up by Parampreet Singh sir on 27th of September from 3:30 pm. And the orientation for geography as an optional subject will be taken up by Indrajit Bariyar sir on 27th September from 6 pm. So these three subjects will be taken up at Bengaluru Center. Shobik Sen sir will take up the optional classes for psychology optional at New Delhi on 28th of September from 3:30 pm. And this will be followed up by the orientation class of sociology by Dr. Surendra Singh sir on 28th of September from 6 pm onwards. On 29th September, the orientation class will be taken up for PSIR optional by Rahul Puri sir from 3:30 pm. Whereas on the same day, that is on 29th September from 6 pm onwards, orientation classes for the history optional will be taken up by Kritika ma'am and Mathimaran Raju sir. Next, on 30th of September, the orientation class for public administration will be taken up by Dr. V.K. Kaushik sir from 3:30 pm, which will be followed up by the orientation class for geography optional at New Delhi campus from 6 pm on 30th of September by Vineet Thaplu sir. Now these orientation classes will be conducted both online and also in the offline mode. And these classes you can interact with your teachers about the optional subjects, the nature of questions asked, and also the syllabus provided by UPSC.
This topic has appeared at page number 11 in today's The Hindu Delhi edition, and this topic is from the International Relations section. The context of this very topic is the recent visit by our External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and his meeting with the leaders of the G4 countries. So in this very line, we should understand that what are G4 countries and what is the specific agenda of these G4 countries. As far as the scheme of syllabus is concerned, this topic is particularly relevant from the General Studies Mains Paper 2 in the International Relations section because it mentions important international institutions, agencies, their structure as well as mandate. And the important institution in this particular news is United Nations. So in today's session, we are going to learn about the members of G4 countries and the United Nations Security Council reforms, the main agenda of these G4 countries. So as far as the G4 countries are concerned, this is a grouping of 4 countries, that is Brazil, Germany, India as well as Japan. You can remember it by Big Japan, whereby B stands for Brazil, I for India, G for Germany, and obviously 4th country is Japan. All these members have joined hands together with a specific agenda to reform the United Nations Security Council because they feel that the UNSC does not suit the present demands of the global geopolitics. So under today's session, we will discuss about one specific part, that is United Nations Security Council. We will discuss that what is UNSC, its structure, why UNSC reforms are needed and what are the specific areas where UNSC reforms are needed. And then we'll discuss in the end that what is the case for India's permanent membership stake at United Nations. First of all, we must know that UNSC stands for United Nations Security Council. And this is a principal crisis management body and it has the power to issue binding obligations. Now this word is important. Binding obligations on all the members of the United Nations. It has 3 core roles. First is ensuring the international peace and security. Second is UNSC has its role in selection and appointment of the new members to the United Nations. It gives its recommendation to the General Assembly of the United Nations. And third is any change in the UN Charter or any modification in the UN Charter must be approved by the United Nations Security Council. And when we talk about the UNSC, the most important thing is the P5 group. Now, what is P5? We'll discuss it. UNSC has two types of members. One are the permanent members and other are the non-permanent members. Now there are five permanent members which are known as P5, that is permanent 5. Now these members, as the name signifies, are permanent in nature. China, France, Russia, UK and USA. Now these five countries are permanent members, and the most special thing about permanent members are that they have a veto power. Now veto power means that on any issue which is being debated in UNSC, these countries have the veto power. For example, let's say if country A attacks the country B and UNSC decides to sanction the country A, and just one country out of these five countries votes against this sanction, that sanction cannot be imposed on it because that particular country has vetoed it. But the problem is that this veto power is only available to these five countries. The next are the non-permanent members, which are 10 in number, and they are appointed on rotation basis, giving adequate representation on geographical terms. That means all the continents will be given adequate representation. But this geographical representation is restricted only to the non-permanent membership and not to the permanent membership. Now, there are certain issues and challenges in which UN is lacking, and that is why we need reforms in certain areas. Now, first of all, if you closely analyze that these are the five permanent members, and out of these, just look USA, UK, and Russia, and the erstwhile, which was known as Soviet Union in the post-World War II era, were the major powers. And that is why this permanent membership symbolizes the World War II period, post-World War II period. And that is why there is a power disbalance among these five countries and the other complete world. But now if we talk about the present situation, that geopolitical situation has changed a lot. Now country like India is emerging with its full might. Now there is a huge socio-economic and cultural importance of the countries of Africa. For example, Japan is one of the most industrialized nations of not only Asia but of the whole world. Similarly, Brazil has also its importance at the global geopolitical level. So the point is that presently the geopolitical situation has changed a lot since World War II, and that is why there must be a reform and UN must do away with this restricted five permanent member formula. The second important thing is that if you closely again understand this membership, only one country, that is China, is from Asia, right? So there is inequitable representation. Europe is overrepresented because Europe as a continent is very small and it supports a very minuscule share of world population. But if you see the countries, we have France and UK from Europe. Then Asia, we have discussed, is underrepresented because Asia is a very huge continent, but we have just one representative, that is China. And Africa and South America, so large continents, but they have zero representation. The third major issue is of legitimacy and credibility. The latest example being the Russian-Ukraine war. In the past also there have been several invasions, for example in Libya, in Egypt, in Iraq, Syria, Yemen. So there have been continuous invasions going on across the world, but UNSC has failed to stop those invasions and take the necessary steps. That is why in present times UNSC face the crisis of legitimacy and credibility. The north-south divide is the continuation of this very issue, because if you divide the world into two halves, that is north and south, most of the countries, for example China, France, Russia, UK and USA, all these countries are in the north. Then the latest issue is that present times are witnessing the emerging new issues to which UNSC is completely new. For example, in present times, due to globalization, economic interdependence is rising. Environmental degradation has become one of the most widespread threatening phenomena for the entire humanity. And moreover, the transnational threats, for example, terrorism, is becoming highly modified. Now we have cyber attacks. Now the organized crime is becoming high tech. So presently, UNSC is not able to cater all these emerging issues. And the last issue is the relationship between the Security Council and General Assembly of the United Nations. There have been a lack of coordination and continuous friction among these two parts. So these are the broader reforms which are needed in UNSC. Now we will discuss the case for India's permanent membership because India is one of the torchbearer to reform the UNSC. So whenever we have to discuss the case for some country, we must look the geopolitical significance of that particular country. And that is why we will analyze the geopolitical significance of India also in this regard. First of all, India has around 1/6 of the global population. That means the demographic power is huge with India. Second is India is the largest democracy of the world, and that is why it is believed that India's entry into UNSC will provide UNSC with the required democratic values. For example, we all are aware about the hardcore geopolitical stance of countries like USA, Russia, and China. If India enters into the permanent five grouping, then it is believed that India will stand for those countries who are not very strong and thereby will put their democratic principles and values into UNSC. Next comes the economic might. Now, factually, India was the fifth largest economy in 2019, and as far as the purchasing power parity is concerned, India ranks third globally. So that means that India is among the top five economic powers. Now come military. India is a responsible nuclear power, being the third largest military spender and one of the largest standing armies. Further, India's contribution to the United Nations is also very huge. India is the largest contributor to the United Nations peacekeeping operations, which majorly is deployed in the countries of Africa. So that means that India's contribution to United Nations is also very huge. First, at the geopolitical scale also, the latest example again being the Russian-Ukrainian war. India has active participation in the global geopolitics. Further, India is also one of the four members. The grouping is known as G4 members. India is a member along with Brazil, Germany, and Japan. And the major goal of G4 grouping is to reform the United Nations Security Council, and all these countries support each other's bid for the permanent membership in the UNSC. This topic has appeared at page number 11, and the topic reads Quad Signs and Agreement for Disaster Relief and Assistance. So as we can see that this topic is in the reference of the Quad grouping. Now, this Quad grouping is very famous and we already are aware about the important members of this Quad grouping, that is India, Australia, US and Japan. As far as the syllabus of this particular news is concerned, this falls under the General Studies Mains Paper 2 section of International Relations because it specifically mentions bilateral, regional and global groupings or agreements involving India or affecting the India's interest. Further, the relevancy of this topic can also be gauged through the previous year question which was asked in UPSC 2020. Now read this question carefully. The question said that Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, that is Quad, is transforming itself into a trade bloc from a military alliance in the present times. Discuss. This was a long question that is of 250 words. However, an important learning from this particular question is that because we understand that initially it was witnessed that Quadrilateral Security Dialogue or the Quad was started to counter the military rise of China and its unilateral attempt to alter the maritime boundaries in the Indo-Pacific region. However, eventually we witnessed that this quadrilateral security dialogue grouping was transforming itself from military alliance to the trade bloc. That is now not only the strategic dimension, but also the economic dimension became important for these four countries. Now, when we look at this particular news, the relevancy of this quad grouping is mainly from the humanitarian assistance perspective, that is HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. So, from this, we can conclude that the nature of Quad is changing with the changing times because the necessities or the need of the Indo-Pacific region is also changing. And we also understand that Indo-Pacific region have several challenges, and that is why the response to all these challenges have to be multidimensional, and that is what exactly the Quad is doing. So, in this very regard, in today's session, we are going to discuss the disaster vulnerability profile of this very particular region. That why is it so important to focus on the disaster relief by these Quad members? Let us look at the disaster profile or the vulnerability of this particular region. Now, first, we will look at the geological vulnerability. We all understand that this particular region, that is Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean, which collectively is known as Indo-Pacific region, is geologically very active because of frequent tectonic movements. For example, at the entire coast of Pacific, we understand that there is a convergence which is going on. For example, here the convergence is between the Pacific plate as well as the South American plate. Similarly, in this particular region, the convergence is between the Pacific plate and North American plate. Here, Pacific plate is getting converged with the Eurasian plate, and this is the convergence zone of Pacific and Indo-Australian plate. In addition to this, there are several minor plates also, for example, Philippines plate, etc. So, because of this tectonically active region, there are high chances of several disasters, for example, earthquakes, tsunami, and volcanism. The next important dimension of this disaster is from the climatology perspective. Now, in the backdrop of rising anthropogenic activities as well as greenhouse gas emissions, we understand that climate change is a reality and it is impacting various ecosystems across the world. For example, this particular region, that is Indo-Pacific region, is experiencing rise in sea levels, which in turn increases the intensity of floods in various regions. Similarly, this particular region is also being impacted by high intensity atmo-oceanic disasters, for example, El Nino as well as La Nina. Now, what do we exactly mean by El Nino? El Nino basically refers to the warming up of the water on the eastern coast of Pacific, which in turn alters the thermal as well as pressure conditions across the Pacific. And this alteration of thermal and pressure conditions across the Pacific region has regional as well as global impacts. For example, during El Nino times, it is normally witnessed that India faces droughts. So that is why droughts is also one of the biggest disasters of this region. The next important hazard from this particular region, which is increased in recent times, are the marine heat waves. If we have to understand what are marine heat waves, it is basically the heat waves in the maritime areas. That is, when there is excessive warming of the oceanic water and in the upper atmosphere there is a high pressure region, whatever convection takes place from these warm waters gets entrapped because of the anticyclonic conditions prevailing over and above them. And that is why these heat waves get trapped in this particular location and then they move towards the direction of the prevailing winds. But these marine heat waves have a long term as well as short term impacts on the coastal climate of countries like US. Further, because of the alteration in the behavior of the jet streams, we are also witnessing the phenomena of polar vortex. Now, the polar vortex is basically the situation whereby the cold waves, which earlier were entrapped in the north, travels towards south in the US and brings the cold conditions to the subtropical as well as tropical USA. So these are the various disasters, that is earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanisms, rise in sea level, floods, droughts, El Nino and La Nina, marine heat waves, polar vortex, and then you can think about other disasters as well. And because of this high vulnerability of the disasters in this Indo-Pacific region, the Quad members have joined hands together to provide and work for the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and response work in this particular region. But then there are certain challenges as well. Let us have a look in this perspective also. The first and the foremost challenge is of funding. Now, this funding issue almost appears every time whenever we think about mitigating the climate change impacts. The reason is that who will share the responsibility? Will it be equally shared among all the members? Or here also we will follow the principle of shared responsibility based on the principles of equity. In the recent times, we have seen the fluctuating stance of one of the most important members of Quad, that is USA, in the context of climate change. The second important challenge is the developmental aspirations of all the countries in this particular region. For example, India has a strong population to feed. India also have ambitions, aspirations as far as its socio-economic development is concerned. So obviously there will be certain limits to the environment friendly policies in order to achieve the economic objectives. So now, how to balance economy and environment? This is a bigger question. The next challenge is China. Now, because China is out of this Quad grouping, but we all know that China is one of the most dominant player in this particular region, that is Indo-Pacific. So, whatever humanitarian assistance programs are to be taken in this particular region, we have to think that whether those will be feasible or not without the active support and participation of China. Further, this region is very much ecologically sensitive. We have the presence of corals, fishes, planktons, etc. And this high ecological sensitivity, in a way, limits our measures to tackle the climate change. For example, now we cannot take structural measures in the Indian as well as Pacific Ocean to combat cyclonic rainfall or earthquakes. The next challenge is of research and development. For example, again, India lacks the finances in order to support high-tech research and development program in order to understand all these disasters. And the last but not the least challenge is the tropical weather in itself. Now, tropical weathers are very complex and erratic. For example, till now, despite having several studies by almost all the countries, we are not able to understand the true mechanism of Indian monsoon. We have a well defined theory for the formation of temperate cyclones, but when it comes to tropical cyclones, still we do not understand it fully. So these are certain challenges which need to be tackled by all the members of this Quad grouping, that is Australia, US, Japan and India. This topic has appeared at page number 8 and is the leading article in today's The Hindu newspaper. The topic reads The Global South's Assertion in Geopolitics. Now, what do you understand by Global South? What is the Global North? What is the distinction between Global South or North? Is it related to the geography or is it related to the socio-economic levels of development? How Global South is becoming relevant in today's geopolitics? In today's session, we are going to deal with all these questions. So first of all, you need to understand that what do you mean by global north and global south. Now this is a rough line which divides the global north from the global south. As you can see that this line is not overlying the equator, and hence this means that this is nothing to do with the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, which means that this is not geographical in sense, but it is more of social, economic, and political instance. That is, the level of socio-economic development and the political dominance over the world politics. So that is why it is something to relate with the developed world and the developing countries. So as we all know that developing countries mainly consist of South American countries, African countries, Asian countries including this West Asia, India as well as China, and Southeast Asian countries. And the developed world is the North America, that is US and Canada, European economies, Russia as well as Australia. So the rough division between the global north and the global south is such. So let us understand the context of today's news article. As we all know that the international system is witnessing a geopolitical change which is marked by the strive of United States for its primacy, and for it to maintain this primacy it is trying to curb the China's rise, weaken the Russian capabilities, and securing the European dominance as well. But on the other hand, the other players, for example, the global south countries, are having different agendas. They are asserting themselves at the international as well as regional forums. For example, India is advocating for the reforms of the United Nations Security Council. Similarly, Africa is also wanting permanent seat at the United Nations because it is underrepresented. So that is how the global south countries are asserting themselves at the international and multilateral forums. And this global south cooperation is also known as South-South cooperation. Now this South-South cooperation is basically accompanied or characterized by the friendly support as well as empathetic attitude. Now we'll discuss that how this is different from the North-South cooperation. Now we all understand that there are certain examples of North-South cooperation also. For example, let's say there is a huge defense agreements or the technology transfers from the developed countries towards the developing countries. For example, from US towards India. Further, there are also several grants which are provided with the developed economies to the African economies. But now one important thing, the important difference between the North-South and the South-South cooperation is that North-South cooperation is from the powerful to the weaker countries. In a sense, it is one-way communication. But when it comes to South-South cooperation, this is characterized by the empathy, the friendly nature towards each other countries. For example, India believes that it has its own responsibility to support the African countries. India understands that there are several countries in Africa which are still the least developed economies. A very good example of this is India's vaccine diplomacy. So that is why it is said that South-South cooperation is generated out of self or the moral responsibility. On the other hand, the North-South cooperation is less of a moral responsibility, but it is more coerced in nature. By coercion we mean, for example, United Nations has mandated that the developed economies or USA per year has to give certain amount of funds to the developing economies, let's say to combat climate change. So now this is an external pressure, that is the pressure which is put by the United Nations on the developed countries to support the developing countries. But in the South-South cooperation, there is no external pressure. It is purely out of the moral responsibility, and that is why the South-South cooperation is more sustainable in nature. Further, you should also understand that this north-south divide is also an outcome of the colonization, because most of the countries which form the part of the south are the colonies and the northern countries are the colonizers. But in recent times, we have witnessed the rise of several groupings, for example, BRICS, which is composed of Brazil, Russia, India, China, as well as South Africa. And in this, Russia is from the northern bloc and others are from the southern bloc, which is a clear example of the cooperation between North-South. Similarly, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, whereby again we have Russia as well as several countries from the global south, for example, India, Pakistan, China, etc. Similarly, US is also not an exception. For example, we have seen the rise of Quad groupings, whereby we also have USA and Australia along with India. As far as the specific South-South cooperation is concerned, there are several groupings, for example, SAARC, BIMSTEC, as well as IORA. And with the help of these groupings, there is a clear case that the southern countries, that is the global south, is trying to assert for their rights at various regional as well as multilateral forums. The global south understands that the regional cooperation that is among the south-south countries is also important. It also understands that today's geopolitics cannot be based on the exclusive principles. That is why they are also collaborating with the global north. So today's article is all about these things, whereby the global South-South cooperation is asserting their rights in the world geopolitics. Now coming to this particular topic, the Ambedkar tourist circuit. This topic is very much in recent news because of the controversy which has surrounded this particular tourist circuit. In today's session, we will also discuss that controversy in brief, but more importantly from the examination's perspective, because in the examination the controversies are not very important, but the facts, the importance and analysis are important. That is why from the examination's perspective today we will discuss that what exactly is this Ambedkar tourist circuit. More importantly, what were the major contributions of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in making the modern India. So the context of this very topic is the recent controversy. The controversy is surrounded related to the locations which are taken in this particular tourist circuit. The government of India has taken primarily 5 locations, out of which 4 are in India and 1 is London. These 5 locations are primarily selected on the basis of the important life events of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. For example, his place of birth, his place of death, his place of studies, etc. But various Ambedkarite scholars have said that certain important locations, for example, the place where Mahat Satyagraha took place, secondly, the Pune where Pune Pact was signed, such places are more important from the places of birth and death, and those places are not taken in this Ambedkar tourist circuit. So that is why we will discuss that what exactly is the Ambedkar circuit. It was first proposed in 2016 by the central government, and the 5 places which are taken is first the birthplace, that is Janmabhoomi, which is in Mahau in Madhya Pradesh. Second is the place of study, that is Shiksha Bhumi, which is in London. Next is the Diksha Bhumi, the place in Nagpur where Ambedkar embraced Buddhism. Fourth is Mahaparinirvan Bhumi, the place where he passed away, that is Delhi. And this Mahaparinirvan Bhumi, this name also signifies the association of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar with Buddhism. And last is the Chaitya Bhumi, the place of his cremation, which is Mumbai. As you can see in this map, the four locations, that is Mahaparinirvan Bhumi, Diksha Bhumi, Chaitya Bhumi and Janma Bhumi, which are in India, are shown, and one location is in London, which we have already discussed. Now it is said that the proposed Ambedkar circuit will be similar to the recently launched Ramayana circuit as well as Buddhist circuit. The important fact is that all these circuits are part of Swadesh Darshan scheme. So, we will also discuss the Swadesh Darshan scheme in brief. However, this scheme in detail has been covered in the previous DNS because this scheme is not a very new scheme. It was launched by the Tourism Ministry in 2014 to 2015 to achieve the integrated development of theme-based tourist circuits. Now, this is very important. Theme-based tourist circuits. For example, we have discussed now that Ambedkar circuit is having the theme of the life of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Until March 2022, there have been total 15 circuits which are selected in this particular scheme. And this scheme aims to ensure a comprehensive development of all the sites within this circuit related to infrastructure, etc. There are 15 theme-based circuits, for example, Buddhist circuit, coastal circuit, desert circuit, eco circuit, heritage circuit, etc. You can refer to the previous DNS or in today's Word and PDF document, all the relevant factual information related to all the 15 theme-based circuits is given. So to collect that particular information, you can go to the description box, click on the links given for the Word as well as PDF file. Now we shall move towards discussion of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, his life as well as his important contributions. First of all, we all know that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constituent Assembly. That is why he is also known as the principal architect of the Indian Constitution. Another important fact is that he was born in a poor, untouchable family in Mahou, that is MP. This is very significant because given the socio-economic situation of India at this particular point of time, thinking that a child who is born in an untouchable family will rise to such a stature that he will design the India's constitution was a miracle. He became the first Indian to get the PhD degree in economics from abroad, and he is the only person whose statue is attached with the Karl Marx in the London Museum. He, throughout his life, has advocated the values of democracy, non-violence, fraternity, compassion, and equity. And his death anniversary is observed as Mahaparinirvan Din or the Ambedkar Jayanti on 14th April every year. The important contributions of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is in the context of socio-political sphere of India. He has condemned the Hindu scriptures which promoted or propagated the caste-based discrimination. He was a part of Bombay Presidency Committee that worked with the Simon Commission in 1928. One important association of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was Bahishkrit Hitkarni Sabha. The main objective of this particular organization was to promote education and socio-economic upliftment of the Dalits at that point of time. Further, two important magazines of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was Mook Nayak and Bahishkrit Bharat. Now these two magazines are very important as far as your prelims examination is concerned. Now to empower the Dalits politically, he advocated separate electorates for the depressed classes. And this was one major point of conflict with Mahatma Gandhi because Dr. B.R. Ambedkar on one hand believed that the separate electorates is the only tool which can uplift the depressed classes politically. But on the other hand, Mahatma Gandhi believed that separate electorates for these depressed classes will detach them from the large Hindu community and in the long run will be detrimental to their own upliftment. And that is why, as the middle solution, not the separate electorates, but reservation to the depressed classes was agreed by both of them in the Pune Pact, which was signed in 1932. In 1936, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar founded the Independent Labour Party, which was later transformed into the Scheduled Caste Federation. Further, he advocated the free economy with a stable rupee. He also emphasized equal rights for women. From the Constitution's point of view, he considered the right to constitutional remedy, that is Article 32, as the soul of the India's constitution. Being the law minister, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar fought vigorously for the passage of the Hindu Code Bill, which is considered as the most significant reform for the women's right in respect to marriage and inheritance in India. So these are certain important contributions of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. The questions are highly expected in prelims as well as mains of these important personalities, and moreover when something related to these personalities come in the current affairs.